I've had moments when it felt like I was just a background player in someone else's life, but that night, 6 months ago, it hit me harder than ever. Haley had dragged me along to a rooftop party with our friends, and by friends, I meant a collection of familiar faces that I couldn't even name. The crowd was one of those where everyone seemed to know someone, but no one truly knew anyone. It was a mishmash of coworkers, old schoolmates, and random plus ones who somehow became regulars. Take Sean, for example. He'd only been part of the group for around 6 months. No one even seemed to know where he came from. One day, he just appeared. Sean had this knack for always being in the middle of the action, making jokes that weren't all that funny but still getting laughs. Haley thought he was hilarious, but me? I saw him as nothing more than an attention-seeking show-off. As usual, Haley was in her element. She flitted from one group to another, laughing loudly, flipping her hair, and flashing that dazzling smile she reserved for everyone except me. I stayed off to the side, nursing my whiskey, pretending to have a good time while she soaked up all the attention. Normally, I'd let it slide, thinking it was just Haley being Haley. But that night, something felt off. I noticed her phone sitting on the table, buzzing nonstop. She'd glance at it, smile slyly, then turn it face down. "Who's texting you so much?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "It's work," she said without even looking at me. "Work? At this hour?" I couldn't help but press. She finally glanced up, wearing that expression of exasperation she usually saved for me. "Not everyone clocks out at 5, Dylan," she replied. I held my tongue, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. That's when it happened. The moment that replayed in my mind for weeks. Haley stood up, glass in hand, and tapped it with a fork. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. She thrived on this, being the center of attention. "To my husband Dylan," she began, flashing a sweet smile at me. For a split second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was about to say something nice. I was wrong. "Dylan, the man who's reliable, dependable, and always consistent, like a Honda Civic," she continued. "Not exactly exciting, but hey, it'll get you where you need to go." Laughter rippled through the room. My face burned. "And let's not forget his remarkable ability to turn any conversation into a lecture on tax deductions," she added, her smile turning sharp. "Truly, a man of many spreadsheet talents." The laughter grew louder, and Haley sat back down, looking far too pleased with herself. Sean, of course, was laughing the hardest, slapping the table like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. He leaned toward me, still chuckling. "Man, she's got you pegged, huh? Gotta love her sense of humor," he said. I clenched my jaw, feeling like my teeth might crack from the pressure. Leaning toward Haley, I hissed, "What the hell was that?" "It's just a joke," she said, swirling her wine with a casual shrug. "Relax. Publicly humiliating me is your idea of a joke?" I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady. "God, Dylan, stop being so sensitive," she snapped, finally looking at me. "It's not that deep." Before I could say anything else, her phone buzzed again. She picked it up, her thumbs quickly tapping out a reply. That same smug smile appeared on her face. I couldn't take it anymore. Pushing back my chair, I stood up. "I need some air," I muttered, walking toward the exit. The rooftop air was cool and crisp, and it gave me some much-needed quiet. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the city lights, trying to steady the storm raging inside me. Was I overreacting? Maybe. But Haley's behavior wasn't just off that night. It had been building for weeks. The constant buzzing of her phone, her distant attitude, and the way she lit up for everyone else while barely acknowledging me. And now this public roast? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Haley. "You okay? Don't take it so seriously. You know I love you, right?" I stared at the screen, the words feeling hollow, as though she were ticking a box instead of actually caring. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't reply. When I went back inside, the mood at the table felt different. Or maybe it was just me. Haley was deep in conversation with Rachel, her best friend and biggest enabler. Rachel kept glancing at me with that smug little smirk, like she knew something I didn't. Sean, of course, was still lounging in his chair, scrolling through his phone and occasionally laughing to himself. Every time he looked up at Haley, there was something in his expression, somewhere between amusement and satisfaction. "Dylan, my man," one of the guys called out, waving me over. "Lighten up, grab another drink." I forced a weak smile and made my way to the bar, ordering another whiskey. I kept my eyes on Haley as she laughed loudly, flipping her hair with that carefree energy I used to admire. And then I saw it. Rachel slid Haley's phone across the table. Haley picked up her phone, glanced at the screen for a brief moment, and bit her lip to hide a smile. Then, without missing a beat, she turned the phone face down again. That was it. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I marched back to the table, leaned in close, and said, "We're leaving. Now." Haley looked up, her eyebrows lifting in surprise. "What? Why?" she asked. "Because I said so," I replied, my tone sharp. Rachel, as usual, jumped in. "Oh, come on, Dylan. Let Haley enjoy herself. She's been working so hard lately. She deserves to have some fun." My jaw clenched. I turned to Haley, locking eyes with her. "If you don't get up right now, I'm leaving without you," I warned. With a dramatic roll of her eyes, she grabbed her bag, flinging her napkin onto the table as if it were some great inconvenience. "Fine, if it matters that much to you." The drive to the car felt unbearable. Haley crossed her arms and stared out the window the whole way home, her silence louder than any argument could ever be. I didn't speak either. My mind was racing, and for the first time, I wondered if I really wanted to know the truth or if it was already too late. Before we continue, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more updates. By the time we reached home, the tension between Haley and me was suffocating, like a black hole absorbing all the air in the car. She didn't slam the door when she stepped out. Such an action would have required too much effort. Instead, she gave a long, dramatic sigh as if she was the one who'd been wronged and headed straight for the door. I followed her inside, tossing my keys onto the counter while she kicked off her heels and grabbed a water bottle from the fridge. "You want to explain what that was all about?" I asked, finally breaking the silence. Haley gave me a look like I just asked her to solve a complex math problem. What are you talking about? The toast? The phone? Or Sean laughing like an idiot the whole time? Take your pick." She rolled her eyes and leaned against the counter. "Oh my God, Dylan. It was just a joke. You're being so dramatic. You called me a Honda Civic, Haley," I said, my voice rising. "In front of everyone." A smug smile crept across her face, the kind she'd mastered over the years. "Well, you were reliable." My grip on the counter tightened. "This isn't about the toast," I said. "You've been acting different, distant. And don't even get me started on your phone buzzing all night." Haley crossed her arms, the smile vanishing from her face. "I'm sorry if I don't want to spend every minute of my life boosting your ego, Dylan. Maybe it's time for you to look at yourself for once." That was it. I turned and stormed past her into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My heart raced, and my head felt like it might explode. But then I saw her purse carelessly tossed on the bed, and sticking out of it, like a golden ticket, was her iPhone. I should have stopped myself right there. Really, I should have. But my mind kept racing with the little things from the past few months, the late nights, the whispered conversations with Rachel, the constant excuses to catch up with friends. And now, Sean, grinning like he knew something I didn't. So, yes, I grabbed the phone. The screen lit up with a message notification, and my stomach dropped. Sean had sent a message. "You were on fire tonight. Can't stop thinking about that dress." I didn't hesitate. I unlocked her phone. Haley never used a complicated passcode, so I opened the messages. There it was, a thread between her and Sean that went back weeks, maybe even months. I didn't need to scroll far to see exactly what I was hoping not to find. Sean's messages were unmistakable. "Last night was amazing. I haven't stopped thinking about it." And Haley's reply? "Me too. Can't wait for the next time." My hands trembled as I kept scrolling, each message worse than the last. There was no denying it. This was exactly what it looked like. And then it got even worse. I scrolled back to the start of their conversation, all the way to the first message Sean had ever sent. "Hey, Rachel said I should reach out. She thinks you could use a distraction." Of course, Rachel was involved. I put the phone down for a moment, trying to process what I just read. My mind was spinning with anger, betrayal, and disgust. But I wasn't done yet. I opened her photos next. I know, by this point, I had crossed every line. But something inside me needed to know the full truth. There were selfies of them together, hidden in an album. Photos from places I didn't even recognize. One was from just 2 weeks ago, taken at a little cafe downtown, the same day Haley had told me she was stuck in back-to-back meetings. And then there was the video. I didn't even need to press play. Just seeing the thumbnail of her leaning into him, laughing like he'd just told her the funniest joke in the world, was enough. I quickly copied the video and transferred it to my phone, just in case. I turned off the phone, placed it back onto the bed, and sat down, my hands covering my face. This wasn't just a casual mistake. This was deliberate, carefully thought out. It wasn't simply about the betrayal, it was about the effort she had put into concealing it. The way she made me feel like I was at fault while she continued behind my back. The door to the bedroom creaked open, and Haley entered. Her irritation quickly shifted to suspicion when she saw me sitting there, looking defeated. "What are you doing?" she asked, her gaze immediately darting to her phone. Panic flickered across her face. Holding up the phone, my hands trembled. "Care to explain this?" I asked. Her expression hardened. "Were you going through my things?" she shot back. "Are you seriously flipping this on me?" I rose to my feet, unable to contain the frustration any longer. "How long, Haley? How long has this been going on?" She crossed her arms, and that familiar, infuriating smirk appeared on her lips. "Does it really matter?" she said. Something inside me snapped. "Does it matter?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "You've been sneaking around with him, that arrogant jerk, and you're acting like I'm the one who's in the wrong?" Haley stepped forward, her voice dripping with coldness. "Oh, please, Dylan. Maybe if you weren't so boring all the time, I wouldn't have needed someone else to remind me what fun is." In that moment, I grabbed her phone and, without thinking, threw it into the trash can next to the bed. It landed with a solid thud. Her eyes widened in shock, and for the first time that night, her expression turned to genuine anger. "What the hell, Dylan?" she shouted, rushing over to the trash can to retrieve her phone. "Are you crazy?" "No, I'm not crazy," I said quietly, my voice calm but filled with finality. "I'm just done. Done with you, done with him, done with everything." She stared at the phone, now scratched and slightly dented, before looking back at me. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but instead, she let out a bitter laugh. "Fine," she said, grabbing her bag. "You want me gone? Fine, I'll go. You'll see how much you miss me when you're sitting here alone, killing time." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the windows rattled. And just like that, she was gone. I sank back onto the bed, staring at the trash can where her phone had just landed. A hollow feeling settled in my chest, as though someone had hollowed me out and left nothing but the echoes of her last words. I had no idea what came next, but one thing was clear: the life I thought I had was gone. The house felt eerie and still after she left. Her perfume lingered in the air like an unsettling reminder of her presence just moments ago. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, which now contained all the evidence, photos, texts, the overwhelming proof of everything that had happened. It was like being trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point, the silence became deafening. My chest tightened, and a storm of questions raged in my mind, each one unanswered. Why Sean? Why now? How had I been so blind to everything? I needed someone to help me make sense of all this. So, I called Zach. Zach had been my best friend since childhood, the guy who always knew how to keep me grounded. Though he lived in a different state now, distance had never stopped us from staying in touch. If anyone could cut through the chaos in my mind, it was him. "Dylan?" Zach's voice sounded concerned when he picked up. "What's going on? You sound off." "Haley's cheating," I blurted out, skipping the pleasantries. I had no energy for small talk. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Shit," he said finally. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice shaking. "I have the texts, the photos, everything. It's with Sean. Of all people, Sean." "Sean," Zach exclaimed. "That loudmouth? Jesus. I always knew he was a tool, but this." He let out a low whistle. "Man, I'm sorry. That's rough." I went over the details, how I found out, the photos, the texts, everything. Zach listened without interrupting, letting me get it all out. Once I finished, he sighed. "Look, I know what you're thinking," he said. "But going after Sean? It's not worth it." "I wasn't going to," I started, but Zach cut me off. "Don't lie to me. I know you, Dylan. You're probably imagining yourself knocking his teeth out right now. But listen to me. This is not the way to go. You can't let a scumbag like Sean drag you into something stupid. Handle this smart, not with anger." He was right. I knew he was right. But that didn't make the anger go away. "So what do I do then?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "You do what she never expected," Zach said firmly. "You get everything in order. Lawyer up, protect yourself, and let her feel what it's like to lose for once." The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had been run over by a truck. I barely slept, and when I did, my dreams were filled with images of Haley and Sean together, laughing, mocking me. I dragged myself out of bed and forced myself to make some coffee, though I couldn't even taste it. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, the silence around me oppressive. That's when I decided to call Rachel. I wasn't entirely sure what I was hoping for, whether it was an explanation, an apology, or maybe just for her to admit her role in everything. Maybe I just wanted her to acknowledge what she had done, to own up to the fact that she handed Sean the keys to my marriage, as if it were a cruel joke. Rachel picked up on the second ring. Her voice was overly cheerful, too chipper, as though nothing at all was wrong. "Dylan, what's up?" she asked. I didn't waste any time. "What the hell were you thinking, Rachel?" I snapped. There was a moment of silence. Excuse me," she responded, clearly playing confused. I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Sean, you introduced him to Haley. You encouraged this. Don't play dumb with me." Rachel sighed dramatically on the other end, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, Dylan, I don't know what you're accusing me of, but whatever's going on between you and Haley is none of my business." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "None of your business? You're the one who told Sean to reach out." "I saw the text, Rachel. Don't even try to deny it." She didn't hesitate this time. "Okay, fine," she said, her tone suddenly sharp. "Yeah, I told him to talk to her." "So what?" Haley was miserable, Dylan. She needed someone who could make her feel alive again. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. "Alive again? Are you serious? She's married to me. She could have come to me if she had a problem, but instead, she sneaks around with Sean, and you're just, what? Encouraging it." Rachel's voice became condescending, as if I was the one missing the point. "You don't get it, Dylan. Haley's been unhappy for years. She felt trapped, and honestly, I can't blame her for wanting something more than this." I couldn't contain my disbelief. "This?" I echoed, stunned. "What the hell does that even mean?" "You're boring, Dylan," she said, her words cutting deep. "You're predictable. Haley wanted excitement, and you, well, you're just, you." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. So now this is my fault? She cheats on me, and somehow, I'm the bad guy. Rachel's voice dripped with feigned sympathy. "I'm not saying it's all your fault, but maybe you should have seen this coming. That's when I lost it. You know what, Rachel? You're just as bad as Sean. You act like you're above everyone else, but all you do is stir up trouble and watch everything fall apart. If Haley needed someone to remind her what it feels like to be alive, maybe you should have suggested therapy instead of sending her straight to the first jerk you could find." Before she could respond, I ended the call. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in days, I felt clear. Later that night, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a lawyer. I needed to get ahead of this, protect myself, and make sure Haley didn't walk away with more than she deserved. The second call was to Zach. "She's not going to see this coming," I said, pacing back and forth in my living room. "I've got the texts, the photos, everything. The lawyer says it's solid. She's going to lose." Zach chuckled softly. "That's the Dylan I know. Smart, strategic. Stay focused, man. Don't let her drag you down to her level." I smiled grimly. "Don't worry. This is just getting started." A few days after the call with Rachel, I started to feel more steady. The lawyer, Claire, had already begun drafting the necessary paperwork, and I was doing everything I could to protect myself financially. I wasn't great, but I was functional. Then Haley texted me. For words, "We need to talk." It made my blood boil. No apology. No explanation. Just Haley, acting like she was still in charge. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I went home that night, locked the door, and braced myself for whatever storm she planned to unleash. True to form, around 8 p.m., she showed up. She didn't knock. She just walked in, like she still owned the place. I was sitting on the couch, sorting through emails, and didn't bother to get up. "Make yourself at home," I said dryly. She ignored my sarcasm and dropped her bag on the counter. "We need to talk," she said, crossing her arms as if she had some kind of grievance to air. "I'm not interested in whatever excuse you've come up with," I replied, still not looking at her. "God, you're so dramatic, Dylan," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This isn't about justification. It's about, I don't know, closure." "Closure," I repeated, finally looking at her. "You think I'm going to sit here and give you closure after everything you've done?" Her jaw tightened. "You make it sound like I set your house on fire. People cheat, Dylan. It happens. Grow up." That was it. I stood up, fists clenched at my sides. "You're unbelievable. You didn't just cheat. You humiliated me. You lied to my face. And now you're standing here acting like it's no big deal? What's wrong with you?" Haley's expression remained unchanged, But now, she looked more annoyed than anything else. Oh, stop playing the victim. You think you were some perfect husband? You were boring, Dylan. Predictable. End of rephrase text. I heard nothing but work, bills, and future retirement plans from you. It was all you ever talked about. I needed something more than that. So, of course, you turned to Sean, I snapped. A guy who probably spends more time selecting his Instagram posts than making sure he can pay his rent? A sly smirk tugged at her lips. Sean made me feel alive, she shot back. Something you haven't done in years. The room fell into a heavy silence. Her words hung in the air, laced with venom and precision. My chest tightened, my heart thudded in my ears. You're disgusting, I said in a cold, calculated tone. And for the record, Sean doesn't make you feel alive. He just validates you. That's probably all you've ever cared about. Haley actually laughed. A full, mocking laugh. She shook her head. Wow, you really think you're above everyone, don't you? She said. That holier-than-thou attitude is exactly why I stopped trying with you. Stop trying. I barked, stepping closer to her. Don't kid yourself, Haley. You never tried. You just faked being perfect while blaming everyone else for your miserable life. Her face darkened, but she didn't back down. At least I didn't waste my life being mediocre, Dylan. Face it, you're nothing special. Sean might not be perfect, but at least he's exciting. I let out a dry, bitter laugh. Yeah, really exciting. Let's see how thrilling he is when he eventually betrays you. You really think you're special to him? You're just another fling, Haley, and when he moves on, you'll have nothing left. For just a second, I saw something crack in her expression, just a brief moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Her smirk returned, like armor. Better than being stuck with you. That was when I realized there was no hope for this conversation, or for anything else between us. You're pathetic, I muttered, quieter this time. Get out. She tilted her head as if considering whether to argue, but then grabbed her bag. Fine, but don't come crying to me when you realize how much you'll miss me. I didn't say another word. I just stood there as she walked out the door, not even sparing a glance back. Before you find out what happens next, make sure to subscribe to the channel. The following day, I told Claire everything, the texts, the photos, the financial mess, every awful detail. She listened intently, her pen racing across her notepad as I spoke. When I finished, she looked up at me and said, "She's going to fight back." "Let her," I replied. "She doesn't deserve a penny." Claire smirked. "With what you've shown me, she won't get anything." That small win was the first thing that made me feel human again in weeks. Later that night, I received a text from Rachel. "You really need to apologize to Haley. She's been through a lot." I couldn't believe my eyes. Apologize? To the woman who cheated on me and blamed me for it? I quickly typed back, "She's been through a lot? Are you serious? She's the one who destroyed this marriage, Rachel. Stay out of it." Almost immediately, Rachel replied, "You're being petty, Dylan. If you'd been a better husband, none of this would have happened." I stared at my phone in disbelief. How could someone be so delusional? Rachel wasn't just enabling Haley, she was rewriting the whole story to make her the victim. I texted back, "Thanks for the unsolicited advice, Rachel. Maybe you should take a good hard look at your own life before giving me advice about mine." I hit send, blocked her number, and tossed my phone onto the couch. I was done trying to be nice. That night, sleep evaded me. The anger, frustration, and absurdity of it all swirled in my mind like a storm. But underneath all of it, there was something else, a bitter clarity. Haley and Rachel weren't just toxic. They thrived on it. They lived for drama, for control, for the satisfaction of watching others suffer. And for years, I had been their perfect target. Not anymore. A few days later, I started getting messages from mutual friends. The fallout from Haley's confession had clearly spread like wildfire through our social circle, and my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, missed calls, most of them from people I hadn't heard from in months, yet suddenly, they cared about my personal life. The first one I picked up was from Amanda, one of the quieter people in the group. Honestly, I never thought she had much of an opinion on anything. "Dylan," she began cautiously, almost as if she feared I might lose it on the other end of the line. I heard about what happened. Are you okay?" "Define, okay," I replied, leaning back in my chair, the frustration clearly seeping into my voice. There was a long pause before she whispered, "Look, I just wanted you to know that a lot of us, well, we saw this coming." I straightened up in my seat. "Saw what coming?" "Haley and Sean," she said, her voice almost a whisper. It was obvious for a while. The way they acted at parties, how they'd sneak off to talk alone. Honestly, Dylan, people were starting to think you knew and just didn't care. Her words hit me hard. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the sudden flood of realization. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It's complicated. Amanda finally spoke. Rachel somehow controlled the situation. She made it seem as if you were too distant, always busy with work. And Haley, well, she claimed Haley deserved someone who truly made her happy. My jaw clenched so tightly I feared my teeth would crack. Rachel. Again. Of course, it was Rachel. I'm sorry, Amanda quickly added, as if that would make things any easier. I said nothing more than a flat, "Thanks for telling me," before hanging up, cutting the conversation short. The next call came from Kevin, one of Sean's friends. At first, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won out. "Dude," Kevin began, nervously laughing, "I had no clue about you and Haley. Sean's been keeping things pretty quiet." "Quiet?" I repeated, my voice icy. "Is that what you call making out at parties and sneaking around behind my back?" Kevin stumbled through his words. "Look, man, I'm not saying what he did was cool, but Sean, he's just that guy. He doesn't really think about the consequences. It's not personal." "Not personal?" I shot back. "He slept with my wife. How can that not be personal?" Kevin let out a sigh. "I get it, man. I do. But Sean's not exactly the type to think long-term. For him, this was probably just some fun." Fun. The word echoed in my mind, reigniting my anger. "Let me make something clear, Kevin," I said, my voice low and controlled. "If Sean wants to keep having his fun, he'd better stay far away from me. The next time I see him, I won't be speaking." Kevin muttered something about keeping things calm before hanging up, no doubt wishing he hadn't made the call. By the end of the day, I had gathered a chilling reality. Nearly everyone in our circle either knew or suspected what Haley was doing, yet not a single one of them had said a word. Worse still, some had even encouraged it. Rachel, naturally, was the mastermind. She'd woven a story about how Haley was trapped in a loveless marriage, how she deserved some fun, and that Sean was the perfect guy to give it to her. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was disgusted. These people weren't friends. They were vultures, circling my broken marriage and pretending to care. That evening, I received another call. It was Zach. "How's the war going?" he asked, his tone casual but tinged with concern. "As bad as you'd think," I replied. "Turns out half of our so-called friends were in on it." Zach whistled low. "Damn, that's rough. Want my advice?" "Always," I answered. "Cut them all loose," he said. "Rachel, Sean, all of them. They're toxic. You don't need that kind of energy." "I'm already ahead of you," I told him. "I blocked Rachel this morning. Kevin's probably on his way out too." "Good," Zach replied. "Now focus on the important stuff, your lawyer, your finances, and your peace of mind. The rest is just noise." Zach had always been the one to cut through the chaos and get straight to the heart of things. Later that night, I sat down with a notebook and created 2 lists. One for people I could trust, and another for those who had betrayed me. The second list was significantly longer than the first, but as I stared at it, something shifted. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel anger or hurt. I felt a sense of determination. This was no longer about Haley, Sean, or even Rachel. It was about taking my life back, cutting out the rot, and starting over. A week later, I was beginning to feel lighter. Severing ties with Rachel and the others felt like removing a tumor I hadn't realized was there. My lawyer, Claire, was handling everything, and for the first time in ages, I slept through the night. Then Haley decided to show up. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in the middle of reorganizing the garage when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I ignored it. But when it came again, louder and more impatient, I couldn't avoid it. I opened the door, and there she was, looking as if she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, and wearing one of those outfits that screamed, "I'm doing great without you." "Dylan," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. I just leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Haley sighed dramatically, acting as if I were the unreasonable one. "Look, I know things got messy, but we need to figure this out, for both of our sakes." "Figure what out?" I asked, my tone flat. She moved closer, tilting her head, as if trying to look sincere. "Come on, Dylan. We were married for years. We can't just throw all of that away." I let out a loud, bitter laugh. "You're joking, right? You threw it away the second you decided Sean was more important than our vows." For a moment, Her expression faltered, but she quickly regained composure. I made a mistake, okay? I let things get out of hand, but that doesn't erase everything we had. Haley, I said, shaking my head. What we had was a marriage. What you made of it, though, is nothing more than a joke. And I'm done being the punchline. Her eyes narrowed, and she shot back. You're being so damn stubborn. Do you even care about fixing this? Fixing this? I repeated, disbelief in my voice. You didn't come here to fix anything, Haley. You came here because you're losing. You thought Sean was your ticket to something better, but now you're realizing he's just another guy who uses people and moves on. So spare me the crocodile tears. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in this conversation, she had no sharp retort. Am I wrong? I pressed, watching her closely. Is Sean still in the picture, or has he already moved on to his next thrill? The silence that followed answered everything I needed to know. I stepped back, motioning toward the driveway. You can leave now, Haley. I think we're done here. But she didn't move. Instead, her face contorted into an expression I had never seen before, something darker, more venomous. You know what, Dylan? She sneered. You're pathetic. All this talk about vows and loyalty, but you never made me feel alive. You think you're some noble victim, but you're just boring. Sean was right. You're the kind of guy women settle for, not the kind they want. Her words stung, but not in the way she expected. As she spat out her venom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that her true colors were showing now, rather than 5 years from now. I gave her a calm smile, one that caught her off guard. You're right, Haley, I said softly. I am boring. I work hard, pay my bills, and don't need cheap thrills to feel alive. But you know what else I am? Free. Free of you, your lies, and whatever drama you'll bring to the next poor guy who falls for your act. Her jaw clenched, her fists tightening at her sides. You'll regret this, she hissed. Doubt it, I replied, shutting the door in her face. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. The silence that filled the space was good, better than I had expected. It felt like I had finally reclaimed something I didn't even know I had lost. Then my phone buzzed. It was Zach. How's it going? He asked when I picked up. Haley just showed up, I replied. Zach groaned. Let me guess. She gave you the whole, we can work this out speech. Pretty much, I said, pacing the kitchen. She's good at pretending, I'll give her that. But when I didn't take the bait, she showed her true colors. Called me boring and pathetic. Zach snorted. Classic projection. You're not boring. She's just terrified of being alone. Yeah, well, not my problem anymore, I said, feeling a weight lift off me. Damn right it's not, Zach agreed. Now, what's the next move? I thought about it for a moment. Finish the divorce, rebuild my life, and maybe, just maybe, find a better class of friends. Zach laughed. That's the spirit. And hey, don't forget to send me an invite when you throw your Haley Free Life party. You'll be the guest of honor, I said with a grin. That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry or bitter. I felt free. Haley's harsh words no longer had the sting they once did. Because I finally understood something, her opinion didn't matter anymore. I wasn't the villain in her story, I was just her excuse. And now, I didn't need to play that part. As I sat on the couch, sipping a beer and watching the sunset, a strange sense of peace settled over me. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something much better. It had been nearly a week since Haley's visit, and I was beginning to adapt to my new reality. The divorce paperwork was moving forward smoothly, thanks to Claire's help, and I had cleared out most of Haley's things from the house. Life was far from perfect, but it felt like I was finally taking control. Then Sean decided to make his move. It started with a text. An unknown number. Hey man, can we talk? It's Sean. Seeing his name appear on my phone sent a wave of nausea through me. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend it didn't exist. But another part, still burning with unresolved anger, wanted to know what kind of pathetic excuse he could come up with. So I replied, Me? What do you want? His response came almost immediately. Sean, I think we need to clear the air. Let me swing by. You home? I should have said no. I knew I should have. But something inside me wanted to look him in the eye, wanted to hear what kind of justification he had for what he did. When he arrived, he looked exactly as I remembered, like the smug jerk he was. Designer sneakers, some trendy jacket, and that self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. Dylan, he said, holding up his hands as though he was entering enemy territory. Thanks for agreeing to talk. I know things have been tense. Tense. I repeated, crossing my arms. You slept with my wife, Sean. Tense doesn't even begin to cover it. He winced, like I had just scuffed his shoes. Look, man, I get it. I screwed up. Big time. But it's not what you think. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Then perhaps you could enlighten me, I said, watching Sean take a long, deep breath as if he were about to make some significant revelation. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice for effect. Haley came to me, he began, his tone dropping even further. She said you were distant, that she felt trapped, like she couldn't breathe in your marriage. He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. I didn't expect anything to happen. It just did. I let out a slow clap, the sound echoing in the quiet space between us. What a touching love story, I remarked with a sneer. Let me guess. She painted me as boring, and you, being the noble hero, thought you could rescue her? Sean shifted uncomfortably, his posture stiffening as he tried to explain himself. It wasn't like that at all, he stammered. Yeah, she said some things about you, but I didn't take it seriously. She just needed someone to talk to. Oh, I'm sure you just listened, I replied, my voice laced with sarcasm. Right into her bed. He quickly raised his hands, trying to appear innocent. I'm not proud of it, okay? He said, his tone softer now. But Haley, she's not who you think. She manipulates people, makes them think they're the problem. She did the same thing to me. I stared at him, trying to wrap my head around his words. Was he actually trying to paint himself as the victim here? So, let me get this straight, I said, stepping closer. You want me to feel sorry for you because Haley played you? Newsflash, Sean, you're not the first guy to fall for her tricks, but you're definitely the one foolish enough to think you could get away with it. His smirk faltered slightly, and he looked away, clearly uncomfortable with my bluntness. Look, I'm just trying to be honest here, he said, his voice wavering. I wanted to apologize. I never meant to hurt you. You didn't hurt me, I responded coldly. You embarrassed yourself. And for the record, whatever sob story Haley told you, it doesn't excuse what you did. You knew she was married, Sean. You knew, and you didn't care. Sean opened his mouth as if to respond, but I cut him off before he could speak. You know what? I said, grabbing a basketball from the porch. Here's my advice. Stop chasing married women and stop pretending to be some tragic hero who couldn't help himself. Before I even realized what I was doing, I threw the basketball at him. It wasn't hard enough to hurt, but the satisfying sound of it hitting him square in the head was worth it. Man, Sean yelped, stumbling backward. What the hell? Get off my property, Sean, I said firmly, pointing toward the street. Before I decide to throw something heavier. Sean muttered something under his breath, but wisely began backing away, his hands raised in mock surrender. All right, I'm going. But for what it's worth, man, Haley's not worth all this anger. Let it go. I watched as he walked away, his shoulders hunched like a child who had just lost a fight on the playground. Later that evening, I called Zach. You'll never guess who showed up at my house today, I said, cracking open a beer. Let me guess, Zach replied, clearly already knowing the answer. Sean. Yep, I said. What did he want? To clear the air, I responded bitterly. Apparently, Haley manipulated him too, and now he's the poor, misunderstood victim. Zach snorted in disbelief. Classic Sean. Let me guess. He gave you some half-hearted apology and acted like he had no idea what he was doing. Pretty much, I said. I told him to get lost. And I may have thrown a basketball at him. Zach burst into laughter. Man, I wish I had been there to see that. Did it hit him? Right in his face, I said, grinning. Perfect. That's the energy you need to keep, man, Zach said, his voice full of approval. Don't let these clowns get to you. You're better than all of them. For the first time in weeks, I felt like he was right. As I sat there that night, nursing my beer on the couch, I replayed the conversation with Sean in my mind. He had tried to weasel his way out of responsibility, just like Haley had, but instead of feeling anger or resentment, I felt free. Sean and Haley were exactly what they deserved. Two selfish, clueless people who were more concerned with their own selfish pleasures than the damage they left behind. As for me, I was done being part of their mess. A few days later, the divorce proceedings were in full swing. Claire was an absolute godsend, methodically dismantling Haley's demands with an efficiency that made me wish I'd met her under better circumstances. Meanwhile, Haley was putting on an act, tears, excuses, and enough dramatic pauses to make any soap opera actress proud. The first mediation session was a spectacle. It was me, Claire, Haley, and Haley's lawyer, a slick guy named Bryce who clearly thought he was the smartest person in the room. Spoiler, he wasn't. We hadn't even been there for 5 minutes before Haley launched into her emotional monologue. "I just feel like I've sacrificed so much for this marriage," she said, wiping her eyes with a tissue she had somehow produced out of thin air. "I gave up my career to support Dylan, and now he's trying to punish me for one mistake." Claire raised an eyebrow, her pen poised over her notepad. "You sacrificed your career?" she repeated, her tone neutral but sharp. "Could you clarify what you mean by that, Mrs. Hayes?" Haley sniffled dramatically. "I mean, I could have had a real career if I hadn't spent so much time taking care of Dylan and making our home a happy place. I couldn't stop myself." A laugh escaped, loud and unmistakable. Haley shot me a glare that seemed powerful enough to melt metal. "Sorry," I said, raising my hand in a gesture of apology. "I just needed a moment to take that in. You really gave up your career." I paused, shaking my head. "Haley, you've never stayed in a full-time job for more than 6 months. And let's not forget, the entire time we were together, I was the one cooking, cleaning, and handling all the bills while you were out with Rachel or, well, Sean." Bryce cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Hayes, there's no need to bring up personal matters at this time. We're here to discuss a fair division of assets." "Fine," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "Let's discuss the assets." "Haley, what exactly is it that you're asking for?" Haley sat up straighter, and her fake tears seemed to vanish in an instant. "I want half of everything," she said, her voice firm. "The house, the savings, and I want spousal support for at least 5 years. Claire didn't flinch. "Mrs. Hayes, are you aware that my client has comprehensive documentation of your financial behavior during the marriage? This includes the thousands of dollars spent on luxury goods, vacations, and what we can only call extracurricular activities." Haley's face drained of color, but Bryce quickly intervened. "That's irrelevant. The court isn't here to pass judgment on anyone's morals." "Maybe not," Claire said smoothly, "but the court is here to ensure financial fairness. And considering Mrs. Hayes' spending habits and her lack of financial contribution to the household, we believe her claim to half of the marital assets is excessive." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Haley, realizing she was losing ground, leaned forward and started crying again. "I don't understand why Dylan is being so cruel," she said, her voice quivering. "We built a life together, and now he's trying to erase me from it." I bit my tongue, but Claire didn't hold back. "Mrs. Hayes," she said coldly, "this isn't about erasing anyone. This is about ensuring that the person who contributed the majority of the financial stability in this marriage, my client, retains what is rightfully his. Your actions during the marriage, as documented, speak for themselves." For the first time, I saw genuine panic flash in Haley's eyes as her jaw tightened. The second meeting was even worse for her, anyway. Claire came prepared, armed with evidence, photos of Haley with Sean, screenshots of their messages, and bank statements showing the money Haley had taken from our joint account for her little affairs. Haley's lawyer looked like he wished he could disappear under the table. Haley tried once more to play the victim. "This is so unfair," she sobbed. "Dylan knew I was unhappy, but he didn't care. He pushed me to do this." Claire's voice dripped with sarcasm as she replied, "Let me get this straight. You're claiming that your unhappiness justifies fraud, infidelity, and financial exploitation? Is that what you're saying?" Haley sputtered, but Bryce quickly interrupted. "We'd like to propose a settlement," he said. "Smart move," Claire remarked, her smile sharp and calculating. By the time it was all over, Haley walked away with much less than she'd expected. No house, no spousal support, and only a small portion of the savings, just enough to cover her legal fees. As we left the mediation room, Haley caught up to me in the hallway. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat, her voice low and full of venom. "But you'll never be happy, Dylan. You'll spend the rest of your life alone, stuck in your dull little world, while I go on and live my best life." I turned to face her, calm as ever. "Maybe I will be alone," I said, "but at least I'll be honest with myself. Can you say the same?" Her face contorted in rage, but before she could retort, I walked away. A week later, the divorce was officially finalized. I got the house, kept my savings, and most importantly, I got my life back. Haley had tried every trick, tears, manipulation, and even an attempt to negotiate outside of the lawyers, but Claire's meticulous work left her with no leverage. It was over. I expected to feel victorious, but honestly, I felt nothing but relief. The first thing I did was erase Haley from every part of my life. I deleted her from photos, removed her from my contacts, and even scrubbed my social media profiles of any trace of her. It wasn't just about removing her presence. It was about making space for myself. Next, I tackled the house. One by one, I cleared out every sign of her. Her gaudy throw pillows, the overpriced candles she never used, even the silly fridge magnets she'd insisted we buy on our trips. By the time I was finished, the house didn't feel like it was ours anymore. It felt like mine. That weekend, Zach came to visit. He arrived with a six-pack of beer and a toolbox, announcing that it was time for a home improvement intervention. "Man," he said, surveying the living room. "This place looks like a dentist's waiting room. No offense, but Haley's taste was awful." "None taken," I laughed. "What do you have in mind?" "Let's make this place scream you," Zach grinned. The divorce was officially finalized a week later. I got the house, kept my savings, and most importantly, I regained my freedom. Haley had used every possible tactic: tears, manipulation, and even an attempt to go around the lawyers. But thanks to Claire's thorough work, Haley had nothing left to hold on to. It was finally over. No more soft pastel throw blankets or artificial plants. We were going all in with the bachelor pad look, leather couch, a giant TV, and maybe a dartboard if we were feeling adventurous. The entire day was spent tearing out outdated decor, rearranging furniture, and debating whether or not I needed a recliner. Spoiler alert, I bought one. By the time we were finished, the living room had undergone a complete transformation. It felt cozy, but not overwhelming. It was as if we had hit the reset button. That evening, we plopped down on the couch, beers in hand, watching a basketball game. "So what's the plan now?" Zach asked, glancing over at me. "The plan?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said, his gaze steady. "You know, after Haley." "What's next?" I thought about it for a moment before replying. "I don't know. Right now, I just want some peace and quiet. No drama, no games. Just peace." "Good call," Zach agreed, clinking his beer against mine. "But when you're ready, you know what you should do." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Take a trip," he said. "Get away. Clear your head. Go somewhere you've never been. And just be." I nodded, letting the idea settle in. A trip. That sounded exactly like what I needed. The next week, during my lunch breaks, I found myself browsing travel blogs, aimlessly looking for a place to go. I didn't have a specific destination in mind, just a vague feeling that I needed to escape, somewhere Haley's presence hadn't left a mark. After some searching, I stumbled upon a small coastal town. It wasn't glamorous or exotic, but it looked calm, and that was all I really wanted. The trip turned out to be everything I had hoped for. Long walks on the beach, quiet mornings with a cup of coffee and a book, and best of all, no one asking about my divorce or questioning me about any of the drama. For the first time in what felt like ages, I could finally breathe. One evening, I sat on a weathered bench overlooking the ocean, watching the sun sink beneath the horizon. The salty breeze tugged at my hair, and the waves crashed against the rocks, creating a peaceful rhythm. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about Haley. I wasn't reliving old arguments or wondering what I could have said or done differently. I wasn't angry, bitter, or sad. I was just here, in the moment, feeling alive and whole. When I returned home, things had changed. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt more like a sanctuary. I dove headfirst into my work, began going to the gym regularly, and even made a few new friends there. Little by little, I was putting myself back together. And the best part? I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. I was simply living, and that was more than enough. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.